morning, everyone. That came up quicker than I was expecting, so hopefully I'm not too nervous. Things seem to go much faster when you're presenting on a Sunday. So tomorrow is Labor Day, and I'll admit I'm not much of a Labor Day person. For me, it's mostly been that final holiday before the start of the school year. I happen to have 3 kids. Here in Wisconsin, it doesn't even have that distinction, as many school districts choose to start the week before Labor Day. And I'll be honest, maybe my mixed feelings go a bit deeper than that. Maybe you've always cherished Labor Day and find it to be a meaningful day of relaxation and acknowledgement for your hard work. If so, I tip my hat to you, but I suspect that I'm not the only American with ambivalent feelings about this late summer, in the middle, 3-day holiday weekend. One of the problems is that the history of this day is often ignored. Raise your hand if you knew that today is designated as Labor Sunday. Okay, there we go, right? You've learned something today, at least. Now, I knew, like many people, that Labor Day was supported and kind of brought about, encouraged by labor unions in the United States. But it wasn't until doing some digging for this message that I learned about the circumstances of how Labor Day went from a holiday celebrated in a few states and localities to a federally recognized holiday. Way back in 1894, and I'm giving the very abbreviated version. I'm not a historian, so I'm just going to give you the short version. But way back in 1894, 2 striking workers were killed during the Pullman railcar strike. And government agents in the Army and the U.S. Marshals were responsible for this anti-union violence. There was public outcry, and it was quite tremendous, apparently, at the time. In response, one of the things that Congress and the President decided to do was to recognize Labor Day, which already was an existing holiday in some states and some places, but they decided to recognize Labor Day as a federal holiday for the first time. And this would show the public that they cared about the working class. At that time, that didn't give everyone the day off. So it wasn't the Labor Day we know today, where most of us who aren't working retail jobs or certain emergency positions are, enjoying the day off. But like I said, it didn't give them the day off, but it did ensure that most federal workers at least got a break on the first Monday of September. And the official recognition of Labor Day certainly didn't end the violence against striking workers in this country. But revisiting this history, it does show that this peculiar 3-day weekend holiday, it has more interesting roots than many of us might imagine, or that many of us might have heard about before, maybe. It's not just another day to go fishing or to get a great deal on furniture. I think I saw ads for shoes recently in my feed. Get some shoes on Labor Day. And I think part of the big disconnect, honestly, may lie in how our nation has reacted to organized labor. For decades, unions have been a target of what I would call free market fundamentalists, and yes, that's a bit of a biased term, but I'll try to explain. There's been a coordinated PR campaign by the very ultra-wealthy in our country. It's been ongoing, and the goal is simple: portray unions in a negative light. So portray them as bloated bureaucracies, outdated relics in our fast-paced technological age, and of course, they must be full of lazy, good-for-nothing moochers who can't stand to actually compete for honest wages. This might be why we hear a lot about the virtues of hard work on Labor Day, but it's odd that we don't hear much about how this holiday came into being because of organized labor actually demanding that it be recognized. And not just recognized as another date on the federal calendar, for those federal workers to have off, but recognized as a mandatory holiday eventually for all workers, or as many workers as possible. Again, I understand there's a lot of you that might work retail and maybe you have to work Labor Day. I'm very sorry, you have my sympathies. Or those of us that have, maybe emergency positions where there has to be someone covering that shift on Labor Day. But again, the practice of, the vast majority of the population recognizing this holiday, that wasn't how it began. And we actually have this holiday in the way we do because of strikes led by organized workers. They pressured their employers to make this a mandated holiday, and eventually that became the norm. Now, I know I've said some negative things, right? Right, there's this contest about, what is Labor Day, what is organized labor, where are our values? And I want to say that there's some good news, which is that organized labor does seem to be making a comeback in our nation. Recent polling shows that support for labor unions is actually the highest it has been since 1965. This is according to Gallup. In case you're the type of person who wants to fact check me, please feel free to do that. So this poll says that about 71% of Americans now report having a favorable attitude towards unions. It's been consistently over 50%, and it's been rising steadily the last several years. So it's not just an anomaly with this one poll. And more encouraging, I would say, is that this number of this high percentage of support for unions, it doesn't just seem to be hot air or people expressing an opinion that doesn't translate into anything. In fact, just the opposite. We are seeing successful union drives in major companies. One example is the famous Starbucks coffee chain. You may have heard about this, but I'll go into some more detail for those that don't know. So while the corporate rulers at Starbucks are notoriously anti-union, there are baristas and servers across the country, and including right here in Wisconsin, who are pushing back using online groups to share information. And what they're sharing is information about the official and sometimes the unofficial policies of Starbucks corporate and the ugly anti-union, or I should say union-busting tactics that have been used. So these are things that are really sneaky, meant to stop those workers from organizing in the first place to have a valid union that's agreed upon in the workplace. And these new labor activists, they're finding ways to win successful votes to unionize their local cafes. I think it's especially impressive that it's happening under such immense pressure. Like I said, corporate is not making it easy for them to win these votes. And stories like this, they're inspiring a new generation of laborers and activists. But I want to say that there's a spiritual dimension to this issue. We are here on a Sunday at our Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, so I got to bring that in. And I'd like to address that spiritual side as well, because I think if we don't address it, we're leaving a major piece of the puzzle off of the table. So, I do like the word millennial. I know it's got a lot of baggage, but many of the people in my generation, us millennials, we have struggled with finding a job or a career that gives us purpose. And I'm speaking from my own experience. Maybe you can relate if you're in my generation. If you're not in my generation, maybe you can imagine or relate it to your own experiences. Many of us were told in high school, and I remember this, we were told in high school and college that following your passion was the key to a successful career. We were encouraged repeatedly that we could do anything and to follow your dreams, and so long as we worked hard enough and had our hearts in the right place, we would be able to have our dream career and to enjoy a happy, satisfied life with all, the white picket fence and the house and everything, right? The American dream. Unfortunately, though, many of us millennials, and to be fair, other generations, were lied to. That's not a possibility for everyone in the society we live in today, even if you do have your intentions in the right place. So, for those of us who are left working a boring, everyday job, it can sometimes feel like we are really missing out on something important, something that we should have accomplished. And the cliche I heard a lot growing up relating to this was the idea of, flipping burgers. And that was considered an undignified, low-class job. Something that nobody should want to do. Something that, it wasn't just that there was bad pay for people who had that job, but that if you had a job like that, it must reflect you had a poor attitude and you had low morals. These burger flippers, they became a mini cautionary tale about those who made the least in our society deserved it because they didn't have the motivation and the drive to get good grades, go to college, and become a successful adult. And unfortunately, I do know that some folks are still tied to this negative, judgmental attitude. But here's the main thought I would like to leave you with today. So the teacher in me is saying, feel free to take notes, right? If you want to get the main idea, here it is. Maybe, just maybe, the work we are already doing, however ordinary, is valuable. Even though the world, or our own insecurities, does not always label it as meaningful. There is intrinsic value to your work that you should take pride in. Speaking of my own experience, I remember going back to school recently so that I could get a teaching license. This was from 2017 to about 2019. And I wanted to leave behind a job that I was good at and that did help people. And I wanted to leave that job behind so that I could do something that I thought had more respect and more social recognition. Now, at the time, I knew that teachers didn't make as much as many other professions. I was thinking of going into teaching. And that's why I went back and got my second degree in. But I thought that if I had that label of being a teacher, it would prove that I was doing something that actually mattered. Unlike the job I was currently toiling away at that time in 2016 and before then. My job at the time, in my view, I was sitting in a cubicle. Some days I was working from home, but I would also sit in a cubicle. And in a way, I was trying to create a more positive identity for myself besides guy who is good at talking to angry customers. I don't think many high school seniors graduate with the desire to be excellent customer service representatives. And the funny thing is that after my experience in public education, right, I got my teaching degree, I was able to get out there and start working as a teacher. I saw, and I see now, that teachers often struggle with the exact same problem that I had. Teachers are told by many parents, administrators, and students that their work is obsolete, outdated, and low value. Just some examples, and this is not me talking, but again, what I felt was being communicated to me. Why do we need formal education when we have YouTube and Google to give us all the answers with the click of a button? Why do we need pay raises for experienced teachers when we can simply lower our standards and we can hire someone more inexperienced who will do the same job for less money? And don't get me started on the overall lack of support that teachers experience especially that new teachers experience in our underfunded, overcrowded education system. We could be here all day if I talk about that, so I'm gonna just move along. But I will say, it was painful to discover that simply changing my title would not be enough. It wouldn't be enough to guarantee that my work had the meaning and the status that I craved. Like many young workers, it seemed that I was caught in a trap. I had the job, but I still did not have a job that mattered. I may as well have been that proverbial burger flipper, but with the added benefit of being $40,000 in debt. So some of you do know me, but for those who don't know, I did once again change my career in 2020, just before a certain virus took hold in the USA. And I've been at my current non-teaching position for a good 2.5 years now. My current role could also be seen as having very little meaning and importance, at least to many outsiders. I make lots of phone calls so that I can talk to strangers and hear their opinions on what policies they like or dislike, what candidates they want to support for this or that election, which my organization has decided to get involved with. In basic terms, I get paid to administer surveys with the hope of persuading a small percentage of voters to change their opinions. Hooray. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh on myself. I am also being paid to have conversations, and I am using my teaching skills because I'm also paid to train and manage other employees, which I have not done before in my career. I haven't been a manager before. That's a new type of work for me. And getting the teaching degree actually did help me feel confident to take that step. But let's get back to the topic at hand. Does my work matter? Now, thinking about my current job, a certain number of folks who answer the phone will tell me right out that my job doesn't have value. Sometimes in very crude, harsh language. I'll leave that to your imagination. But the ones who simply hang up while I am mid-sentence certainly make a statement as well. However, I have found ways to reframe my work and to see the positives in what I do. That has enabled me to be resilient. How do I reframe such an emotionally punishing job, though? And people do ask me this, so I've thought about this. Here's an example. I remind myself that a lot of folks would really have no clue about major legislation being debated in our state unless we called them and invited them into a conversation. A lot of people would not participate in our democratic process. I know we love our democratic process. It's in our principles, I know. A lot of people wouldn't participate in that process unless a real flesh and blood human being called them to talk about it. And, heard their concerns and had an honest conversation with them, an honest discussion with them, back and forth. By getting more people to participate and take action, whether that's voting or pledging to call your elected official, our whole society is improved. And I can be proud that the team I'm a part of is committed to providing quality information to voters across the state. And yes, I do have a strong bias and an agenda. If you talk to me for 5 minutes, you'll find that out. But when I talk about issues with voters, I do make sure to give space for varying perspectives, and I do my best to be informed on the topic. That's part of my job. Despite my job still being stressful and challenging, just like any other job, the positive outcomes that I can see in my labor are a big part of what keeps me going, not just that I'm getting a paycheck. And I think it's that feeling of positive outcomes that so many of us are really struggling to find in our work. That feeling of joy. It's not the title that makes your job important. It isn't society as a whole that decides if your job is good. The best person to look at the facts and assess that value, I would argue, is you. You, the worker. So look for the difference that you are making, even in something small, because in many cases, it is the small things that add up to something much bigger and measurable on a spreadsheet. The small things, like a cup of coffee that puts a smile on someone's face. Warm food that keeps a construction worker productive and energetic for a long day. Good advice from a friendly therapist or doctor that motivates someone to live a better life. The hard, sweat-filled labor still needed to build our roads or our bridges, right? Or to repair our roofs after damaging storms, and we get plenty of those here in Wisconsin. Whatever it is, at some point, people need to be told that their contributions really matter. They really do matter. And today, I would encourage you to add another important step by looking inward and considering your work, whether it's paid or unpaid right now. Because I know a lot of good work out there does not get any money associated with it. But look at your labor and your contributions with fresh eyes. It is so easy sometimes to focus on the negatives. This Labor Day, how can you reframe and see something positive in the important work that you do? And I'll make a final closing remark here before I say goodbye and enjoy being downstairs with you all. I do hear some of you maybe are having the social justice calls in some of your heads right now, okay? I do know far too many jobs do not reward us enough. And many folks are stuck in toxic work environments that they need support to leave. Not every job you can reframe into something wonderful and positive, right, as much as you might try. So I'm not telling anyone to ignore these problems. And I'm all for workers' rights to seek better pay and better conditions. Because, of course, that is a part of our history and something we don't talk about enough. But in my mind, these things really do go together. Those organizers who fought for Labor Day and labor rights did so based upon the belief that the individual worker matters, that their contributions to society deserve to be rewarded and not treated as waste or as failure. Thanks for your listening ears, and happy Labor Sunday.